Enjoy all your favorite sports like never before at BetMGM. Sign up using code CHAMPION and your first wager is risk-free up to $1,000. When you register with BetMGM, you'll get instant access to a variety of parlay selection features, live betting options, player props, and daily boosted odds specials. And with BetMGM at your fingertips, every play and every game matter more than ever. Sign up today and find out why nothing beats a win at the king of sportsbooks. Download the BetMGM app or go to BetMGM.com and enter code CHAMPION and place your first wager risk-free up to $1,000. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years of age or older to wager. Virginia only. New customer offer. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire 7 days from issuance. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-888-532-3500.
Welcome everybody back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseurs. This is Matt here, as always, and this week I'm joined by a very special guest. I have Sean Malloy from the podcast I Must Break This podcast, which is a Dolph-centered podcast, and anything Dolph, of course, is great here at the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur, but welcome, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. This is pretty cool.
Excellent. Now, my first question is, what got you into Dolph Lundgren and all of that?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I get asked that question a lot, actually. So, long story short, it was the movie Masters of the Universe, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that film when I was about 5 years old or so, right when it came out, actually. It was one of the first cinematic experiences I can remember in the theaters. And, if you can go back this far, if you can remember this period of time, we didn't really have a heck of a lot of live action movies based on comic book characters and toys and things like that. So when I was, at that young age, I mean, He-Man, he was it. I mean, he was my hero, And so going to the theater to see this live action experience that it was my favorite superhero adapted into a live action film, I became a fan of Dolph because, let's face it, this larger than life hero was playing my other, my fictional larger than life hero. And so it was kind of funny because as a kid, I started following Lundgren's career onward. Okay. A lot of people, their first exposure to him was Rocky IV. Me, that wasn't the case. It was actually He-Man. Then I went back, saw Rocky IV. And then from that point forward, I started following his career. And, it's funny because I talk about this on my show. The very first rated R movie I ever saw in theaters was Universal Soldier, actually. My parents took me to that because they knew I was a huge Lundgren fan at the time, right? And so, yeah, like I said, I just kind of started following his career. And, it's funny because he was one of the first real direct-to-video guys to really capitalize on the direct-to-video market. I'd say about 85 to 90% of his films are all in the direct-to-video world. But I honestly think that if you compare him with all of his other action compatriots, if you will, with the Arnold and Sly and Van Damme and Steven Seagal, I've always felt that Lundgren has always had the most fascinating career out of all these guys. And that's kind of why it was about 2.5 years ago. That's kind of why I started the podcast. There were tons of fan podcasts out there that focus on specific TV shows and movies and genres and whatnot. But there wasn't one that really dove into his films and the type of films that he was doing. And I'll admit right now, a lot of his films are not that great. They're actually kind of junk, to be perfectly honest. but I feel like his headspace at the time those films were made is equally fascinating to look at. And so with my podcast, we pretty much go in chronological order, looking at every Dolph Lundgren movie from Rocky Four, which was 1985, all the way up to the present, and we just kind of analyze, review, and just openly discuss every one of his films. And it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because I was thinking about, for me, the film that did it for me. It's interesting because I knew him from Rocky Four, and I knew him from Masters of the Universe. But for me, it was actually seeing Showdown in Little Tokyo. My friend had a Descrambler. So I remember with cable at that time, right? You could get a Descrambler and get all of the pay channels, and so he had pay-per-view, and that was how we had that. But it is funny you mentioned that about Dolph, because it at the time, right? They think with He-Man, that was supposed to be such a big movie because the toys were so big, right? And we were just all getting them, and that was supposed to be the thing that catapulted him into that like Arnold, Stallone level of stardom.
Yeah, he's had quite a few opportunities where the films that he had done around this time, especially early in his career, were all poised to kind of catapult him and make him the next big action star. The problem with all these films is the production companies behind them. I mean, it's talk about bad luck, man, if you think about it. But every one of those films that he had done had production companies and financiers behind them that were pretty much on their last legs, that were struggling. So you had He-Man, the Masters of the Universe movie, that was fronted by Canon Studios, and they were pretty much they were falling apart by that point. After that, he did Red Scorpion. Red Scorpion, that was supposed to be released by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers pulled out of that one's production, so another company picked it up. They didn't have the legs to properly market it. And then after that, he did The Punisher. And The Punisher, same kind of thing. That was New World Pictures, and they were also going under. I mean, so like I said, it's bad luck. But what's also really interesting is around that time, playing a cartoon hero, if you will, or a comic book hero in the case of The Punisher, that was kind of considered around the time as maybe not being career suicide, but that was a bit of a risk. And it's so wild if you look at it today, how today actors are desperately trying to latch on to a comic book property, because that's in a weird way, in our current cinematic climate, that's the only way to stay relevant and to stay afloat.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, especially like you consider like now Dolph is in the Aquaman movie, with a small part there, and it's like, his character did survive. Spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, he does survive the movie, meaning he could be in the sequels. And so it's almost like in a way, it was like almost like redemption for that Punisher movie that didn't quite make it. And like you said, at that time it wasn't as big a thing to be in a super. I mean, I think there was the one exception. I think was probably like Michael Keaton with the Batman series, where it was like people wanted to be Batman at that time, and then when the George Clooney one came out, suddenly people stopped wanting to do that again. But it's almost like that Aquaman movie. It's almost like redemption for him, and I think that was one thing that was kind of cool to see him in a movie like that.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And with regard to the Punisher movie, I mean, for years that film was maligned, pretty much because of the fact that he didn't wear the skull.
Right.
But what I think is so rewarding about that film is now it seems like people have finally turned around on it and said, yeah, actually Dolph's Punisher was actually the best interpretation of the character. So, and it's really wild, if you look at Lundgren and his career, where he's at nowadays. I would argue, compared to Arnold and compared to Sly, I would say he's almost bigger than those guys in a lot of ways. And a lot of that is the pop culture and the nostalgia that, is surrounding him. But, within the past few years, thanks to Creed 2 and thanks to Aquaman, he has gotten back in the mainstream. And that's one of the things that I found to be so rewarding about the podcast is, here I've been doing the podcast and we discuss the highs and the lows of his career. And unfortunately, a lot of the films, there are a lot of lows, but that was what was so cool is I started it in September of 2017. And then in 2018, he had these two big blockbuster movies that came out in the theaters within a month of each other. And here I am doing this, small little podcast. It was kind of cool to see him back on top.
Yeah, yeah. And pivoting back to your podcast, I know you talked about how you cover movies, but you also interview people that have been involved in some of his pictures. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that was, it's kind of weird how that happened. It kind of started on a bit of a lark. Basically, I reached out to one director of a film that he had done back in 2012 or so called Battle of the Damned, and I interviewed the director of that film. His name is Christopher Hatton. He was a wonderful guy, super cool to talk to, and I recorded that episode and. I just started it was kind of weird because you know how it works, when you open one door, suddenly other doors kind of open. And what I discovered is there are tons of people out there who have worked alongside the guy over the years, from directors to actors to screenwriters to stunt performers, you name it, who are gracious enough to just talk to you. I mean, it never hurts to ask. And so, yeah, so over the past couple of years, I've just started reaching out to these various individuals. And what's been kind of cool is now the show has kind of gotten into a bit of a format of sorts where we have a movie review episode, and then I do a mini episode, which is a review, or excuse me, an interview. And so, like I said, I've gotten to interview tons of people who I never even got to think that I would even get to speak to for more than 5 seconds, and to get to have conversations with these individuals that range from anywhere from 25 minutes to an hour has been pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, looking through your episode list, I mean the names are great. I mean, I think you had a chance to talk to Sarah Feeney, right, who did some of those Dolph movies. I think did some recent ones in Italy, for example, and Daniel Zarrilli, who did what was it, Acceleration, I think.
Hmm.
That he directed with him, and yeah, and names like that. And we're going to talk about another name coming up when we talk about the film here that you had a chance to talk to as well. But what are some moments? What are some interesting tidbits that you've gotten from some of those conversations?
Boy, I think what's interesting is everybody who I've gotten to speak with always comes back to the same thing. They say that the Dolph is just extremely gracious and just a wonderful, wonderful human being, which is which of course makes doing the show wonderful. They all say that. Of course, there's the. It's not even a rumor. I mean, everybody knows that the guy is smart. The guy
Mm,
has a master's and
right.
all that, and so everybody always comes back to that as well. I mean, while I'd say the majority of his films did go direct to video, um, he does know the business, and he does know how to work not only in front of the camera but behind the camera. And so in speaking to these various directors and screenwriters, everybody, they all kind of come back to the same thing, to which they say, he knows how to shoot himself. When he's on camera, he knows the best way to uh, you know, I guess his best angles, if you will, when he's being filmed. And they also know, when it comes to his character, he knows the type of characters that he wants to play. And so that's been really cool. The two interviews for me that really stand out, that I couldn't believe I got to speak with him on, was I got to talk to Uwe Boll, who
Mm,
everybody knows who Uwe Boll is. That was an amazing, because even before I started the show, I've always found Uwe Boll just be a fascinating, individual, regardless of
yeah.
how you feel about his films. But the other one was Tony Messenger, who has
Mm.
been Dolph's stunt double for over 15 different projects. One of which was the film that we're talking about today, Don't Kill It.
Wow, that's really cool. So yeah, it's you talk about Dolph being shot in a certain way, and that there's something about Dolph. I think that the thing that makes Dolph such a compelling presence in a direct-to-video movie or whatever movie he's in is that it just feels like the moment he walks onto into a scene, the whole scene changes. That it's interesting that to hear that he almost like he apparently knows it, right? He knows how to make it happen. That presence occurs in the movie.
Yeah, it's really amazing too. I mean, because, and he also, I mean, and I think this is with any action star, if you will. But they know, not only do they know like how to shoot them, how do I want to say this, how to appear, tough and awesome on camera, but they also, the thing I've discovered with Dolph is, if you look at him throughout the films, I mean, the guy knows how to put on weight, how to lose weight quickly. I mean, how to, get extremely jacked, for
Right.
certain roles. I mean, I will say I was fortunate about 6, 7 months ago, something like that. I did fly out to a convention where he was at, and so I was able to meet him, and I did get a picture next to him and everything. And it's amazing when you just watch him and I was standing behind. It's funny because I was standing behind in line waiting to get the photo and waiting to get the autograph and everything, and watching the photographer who was taking the photos. And it's really kind of cool because as I was standing watching him do this, as soon as the camera goes on, he immediately, knows how to get his muscles and everything to pop for a photo. I mean, it's almost emasculating, to be perfectly honest. But I mean, it's really amazing just watching just how as soon as the photographer would say, "Okay, ready," and as soon as he kind of gave that, Dolph would just bam, and those muscles would just pop, and then he'd relax. And then I mean,
Yeah, I'm not surprised. One of the things I've heard from when I've seen interviews and things on TV with stunt coordinators that have worked with him, and maybe Tony Messenger alluded to this too, that he not only is he like really intelligent, but he is an Olympic class athlete who just has this immense muscle memory that he can do these fight scenes. And I'm sure of course now he's getting a little bit more up in age, and so it's not quite to the level it was when he was first starting out. But it feels like he's still, even in scenes where he is a little bit older in some of the newer ones, it feels like you can see that in his ability that he can sort of on a dime just make his body do what he needs to do for that scene.
Yeah, most definitely. So yeah, but it's been like I said, it's been a ton of fun doing the show, and obviously the big hope and the big goal is I would love to, of course, get him on the show one day and just get to pick his brain. And to be honest, what's funny is I feel like any interview with him, he always seems to get asked the same questions. He always seems to get asked about working with Sly on Rocky Four, and I mean, which look, Rocky Four was the film that put him out there. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, I feel like he has done so many other amazing films. He has so many great performances under his belt that I don't feel get recognized. I mean, so I would love to chat with him about Men of War. I don't know if you're familiar with Men of War, but I think Men of War is one of the shining achievements in his filmography. I'd love to chat with him about working with Russell Mulcahy on Silent Trigger. I mean, those are some films within that era that just really don't get mentioned. So that's kind of my big hope. But in the meantime, like I said, I've gotten to speak with Giorgio Serafini, who has directed him now 4 times, a couple times in Italy, I guess. And so, he was one. John Lyde, who directed the prison movie called Riot. I got to talk with him. I mean, it's been it's been a fun journey, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, I think that one of my favorites that you did was the review one on The Defender, which I think is another one that if I ever met Dolph, that's what I would ask him about, was what it was like working with Jerry Springer. But
Yeah.
But he also directed that one, and that one's an interesting thing too. Is when you hear him talk about being a director. I mean, he does mention sometimes maybe leaning on his director of photography some or something when he's making the film, but he does have a sense of, like you said, behind the camera, how he wants a movie to look, which I think sometimes when you hear about actors being directors, it's almost like they're being the director because either they didn't get along with the director or the producer didn't get along with the director, or something. It was almost like an afterthought to get the actor in there, or if it's like a vanity project, right, where the actor is directing it. Whereas Dolph, there is a sort of technical acumen there that you can see in those films that he's directed.
Well, and I mean, in that particular episode, I think we kind of came upon a conclusion. I have a theory regarding The Defender. If you look at his career from about the late '90s to mid 2000s or so, it was kind of a rough go for him. I mean, not many of the films that he had been doing were good, to be perfectly honest. And I mean, you really can't fault him. I mean, he's a working guy like us all, and he's taken the work where it is, right? But unfortunately, I would say some of his worst films were within that era. And so, what's really fascinating to me about The Defender is it was around that period, around 2004, where he finally started directing. And if you really think about it, Matt, around this particular period, the guys who were kind of ahead of him in terms of the action genre, Wesley Snipes, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal. Around this time, they were leaving the theaters and they were also starting to go into the world of direct to video, right? And so I honestly think what Dolph was thinking around this time is he was thinking, okay, this turf that I've been dominating, if you will, is starting to be overcrowded by these bigger guys. I need to make my films stand out in some kind of way. How do I do that? And so I think he honestly said, you know what, I'm tired of these films like Agent Red or or The Last Warrior or Jill the Ripper. I mean, Jill the Ripper has some okay things going with it, but I think he honestly said, look, if I'm going to be competing with these other guys, the Snipes and the Seagals and the Van Dams, well, I got to make my films stand out. And how do I do that? Well, I'm going to be manning the ship, and I'm going to be doing this all on my own. Maybe not all on my own, excuse me, but I'm going to be, you know, um, in charge of the production at this point. So that way I can ensure that it turns out to be something that I'm proud of.
Yeah, and I think you make a really great point, because if you compare, if you kind of take the Pepsi challenge with Dolph's work from that, from sort of that post mid 2000s on versus Van Damme, Seagal, some of the other actors that went DTV, Dolph really does it's definitely superior. I think some of the names that got crowded out, maybe like a Gary Daniels, who was making some DTV stuff at that time and kind of lost. I mean, I think someone like a Lorenzo Lamas found his way in other stuff, but Don the Dragon Wilson, I think he gets crowded out a bit. Cynthia Rothrock, but Dolph finds a way, like you say, to kind of make it so he perseveres and actually it prevails over them. I think, because I think his work was superior there, and that's a good point. I never really made that connection like that, but that is a really good point. That it's almost like he had an impetus to make better stuff because he knew he was those guys were starting to horn in on his turf.
Yeah, and what's also, in my opinion, remarkable. I mean, we talked about this on the latest episode that I did. But Missionary Man was another one of his films that he wrote, directed, and starred in. And what's really cool about that one is I remember when that one came out in 2008. He was marketing it. Like, he was going out there, he was doing interviews, and he was really trying to sell it. He did the same thing. He did another film in 2009, 2010 or so, called Command Performance, that he also helped write and direct and starred in. And he was also going on various interviews and promoting that as well. And that's just something you don't see. I mean, let's be honest. You do not see that kind of promotion getting done for a direct-to-video movie. I mean, you certainly never saw Seagal do that. You certainly never saw Van Damme. Now, not saying the stuff that those guys did in the direct-to-video genre was bad. I think some of Van Damme's best work came out of his years in the direct-to-video stuff. But he certainly wasn't doing interviews, you know what I mean, promoting it. And the other thing too that I think we kind of came upon with The Defender is, you mentioned, like the Gary Daniels, Lorenzo Lamas, all those guys. If you think about it, around this time too, not only was their turf getting crowded, but they were also being phased out. I mean, so if you think about it, around this time, Brian Bosworth, he pretty much, remember the days of Brian Bosworth?
Yes, oh yes.
Yeah, Brian Bosworth, he was pretty much done. I mean, I think he was hanging it up. Same thing with Jeff Speakman, Michael Dudikoff. You mentioned Don the Dragon Wilson. I think all these guys were kind of realizing, okay, the bigger dudes now are coming in, and the projects that we're getting are, pretty much not there anymore. And so they were stepping away. And so that's the thing. I think Dolph was saying, okay, look, this is my turf. I've been doing this for a while. Well, then you know what? I'm gonna step it up, and I'm gonna make, even if it is a direct-to-video film, well, then I'm gonna make it look 10 times bigger than its budget would allow.
Yeah, and I think to some extent Van Damme has sort of come around to Dolph's way, because he is starting with the direct-to-video movies. He is starting to make some that are bigger production. I mean, they kind of verge into that 100-minute plus category, which I don't always like for DTV. I think a cool 90 minutes usually does the trick, but he is, I think, starting to do a little bit more and putting more effort into those movies. I think maybe he sees what Dolph did there. But yeah, it is amazing because I remember with Gary Daniels. I mean, he had to start to go to Thailand to make movies. He was doing religious pictures, things like that, because he just, he wasn't getting the roles that he was getting when PM Entertainment was big and those houses were making films. And it does seem like Dolph, and I think Dolph, he did have some issues. I know with Sweepers, he didn't get along well with Keone Waxman, who, Keone Waxman does really well with Seagal, right? They're almost like, I always joke that he's like the Seagal whisperer because he gets the most out of Seagal in a lot of those pictures. But, I think those were experiences that Dolph looked at and said, okay, if I'm working with a director in Keone Waxman that I feel like isn't experienced enough to do what I want to do in this picture, I need to maybe start making the decision to be the director myself or something like that. And then for Keone Waxman, I think it's sort of like he probably learned from the Dolph situation too, where he's like, okay, if I'm working with someone like that, like Seagal or whoever, I'm going to do my best to sort of put them in the best situation to succeed in the film and make them feel comfortable, and get what I can out of them. So it's probably a learning experience for both. But that's also Sweepers is another one that I throw into that category you were talking about with Last Warrior, Agent Red, and those where it just didn't work. It was one that just didn't quite work, and that was probably another learning experience for him where he's like, boy, if I keep making Sweepers while these guys are coming in here, they're just going to start casting those guys in Sweepers. They're not going to bother with me anymore, and so I need to make it better.
Yeah, no, I'd completely agree. And the whole Seagal whisperer comment. I mean, I never really thought of it that way, but no, you're exactly right. I mean, the thing is say what you will about Seagal, and I mean, so that right there could be a whole podcast in itself, especially the past 10 years. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I feel like the two of them, those two individuals, they must be doing something right, because obviously Seagal likes working with Keone Waxman. Obviously, Keone Waxman, he enjoys working with Seagal, or else he wouldn't keep coming back to him. And I think it's a matter of, because I think with any of these guys, any of these big name stars who are on set, it's pretty much, yeah, sure, it's Keone Waxman who is the credited director, if you will, but I think it's Seagal who's pretty much running the show. It's his way. He's doing things, and I think Keone Waxman is the type where he's like, all right, he's hands off. He lets Seagal do his things. Hey, if Seagal wants to wear his sunglasses in this shot here and wear that muumuu, then fine, let's shoot the film.
Right. He doesn't want to do his reverse shots. We'll get someone who looks as close to him as possible, and we'll do the reverse shots that way. And yeah, and I mean, because you were mentioning with Dolph, because he has his own directors that he's worked with multiple times, like Serafini, Sidney J. Fury, and so there are directors that work well with him too. So that's probably part of it too. Is I'm sure Serafini has a similar approach with Dolph, where he's like, Dolph is, he's usually listed as producer or executive producer on the films that he's on now anyway. So that's probably part of it, is that there's sort of more of a give and take there, as opposed to just Serafini just telling Dolph where he needs to go all the time.
Right. Exactly.
Now, just the movie that we were going to talk about here is Don't Kill It, and I chose this one for our episode for a couple reasons. One is I'd heard so many good things about it. A lot of people really thought it was a good one, and I hadn't reviewed it or anything yet for the blog yet, so I thought that would be a good topic for us. But also, one of the stars in the film is James Chalk, who I know you've spoken with as well, who has done a good amount of movies with Dolph.
Yeah, he and Dolph go way back, man. I mean, they they go pretty far back. They practiced Kyokushin karate together, I guess. And so yeah, they've been buddies for quite a while. And then I guess from what I gathered from my conversation with Chalk is they kind of lost touch. But then when one of them moved back to Los Angeles, I guess they kind of reconnected again. And yeah, it's funny. They've done a ton of films together, mainly the ones that Dolph directs. Dolph always seems to find a role for James Chalk, but then he also many of these films Dolph is also the producer, so he's able to kind of find a role for his buddy as well. But Chalk was he was a great guy to chat with. He had some hilarious stories to tell. I mean, because what's funny about him is if you see him in these films, in most of Dolph's movies, he plays the bad dude. He plays the bad guy. And so in speaking to him, to be perfectly honest, I was a little nervous, but he was
Mhm.
just the ultimate most sweet guy that to talk to. And like I said, he had some great stories. And funny enough, when I asked him about his one of the favorite films that he had worked on alongside Dolph, he had said "Don't Kill It." He said "Don't Kill It"
Oh,
was just the most fun experience out of all the films they had done together.
yeah. I mean, because it seemed like his role was a real fun role to play, as the sort of as
And
the
I think
the
that's why.
priest. Yeah, yeah. I mean, getting into the film itself. I mean, what were your thoughts on Don't Kill It overall?
Well, first of all, when we look at it, the Dolph did a movie back in 1998, 99 or so called The Minion. Are you familiar with The
Yes. Oh,
Minion?
yes. Actually, the funny thing about the Minion is that I when I reviewed that for my blog, I said it was too amazing for words or something like that, and I meant it not ironically, but I meant it because like it was there was so much craziness happening, and it was it was just kind of goofy that I said that, and it actually one of the versions, the DVD version, it's a 3 movie set. They couldn't find anything good to say anywhere about the movie, so they put my blurb from the Minion on the back cover. So that's my direct-to-video connoisseur blurb on a DVD cover is the Minion.
Oh, nice, nice. Was that the 3 pack then? It was the 3 pack with
Yes,
was it that and like the Prophecy too or something, right?
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, what's so funny about it though is, the Minion, Dolph plays he plays a badass priest who's trying to
Right.
track down a demon who is jumping from bodies and everything like that. And so it was just wild to me that, so many years later he pretty much did not the exact same movie, but essentially the same story. I think the only real difference between The Minion and Don't Kill It is the character that Dolph plays, which again, that's what I think attracts Dolph to most of his roles is he likes to play new characters. And so the character of Jebediah is so different than his character Lucas in in The Minion. But it was just kind of wild to me when I saw Don't Kill It was in production and I started reading about it. I was thinking, is he's going back to remake his own movie? Like,
Right. Well, that was a similar thought that I had just because when I saw the ad for it, and I was like, do I want to watch this movie or not? Or maybe I'll study. And like everybody was telling me like, no, you got to see Don't Kill It. And I definitely thought it was a fun time for sure. I think it was fun in a more deliberate way than the Minion was. I think the Minion wasn't meant to be as much fun as it was. I think they were serious about him being a KGB trained Knights Templar priest. That wasn't supposed to be like played for laughs. Whereas I think this Jebediah character, he's serious as the hero. Like we're rooting for him and we want to see him, succeed. But he's also someone we're supposed to be having fun with, which I appreciated.
yeah, and I think that's really what sells the film. Is I feel like you've seen enough of these direct to video movies, as have I. I feel like one of the things that makes them stand out and that makes them watchable is if in the production they know that it is a little silly and that it's a little goofy and they're having fun with that. And that's clearly, I think, what is going on with Don't Kill It. I mean, it is very clear that obviously it's on a lower budget and it's a independent film, I guess we can say. um, but like I said, they're having fun with it. Mike Mendez, the director of it, I listened to an interview actually with him on Mick Garris has a podcast, and so he was talking about this, and he said he went into it. First of all, they decided to film it in Alabama, which was not the initial plan. So they had to go to Alabama, and also they truncated the shooting time. So he only had so many days to shoot as opposed to what was initially planned. But Dolph came on board. He loved the character, and Mike Mendez and everybody made do with what limitations they had. And I think it turns out it's a fun movie. I mean, it doesn't require a whole lot of special effects. Maybe some special effects might have worked for it, but it's a fun movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times with these direct-to-video movies, less is more generally anyway. I think that, yes, you'd like if somebody making the movie has enough of a shooting time that they can really get the movie out that they want to get. But, the movie comes in at like an hour and 23 minutes, and I feel like with this kind of a plot where it's sort of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like it's kind of a MacGuffin type plot in a way that it's like the demon's the MacGuffin that they're trying to catch or whatever, or trying to find. You can only do that for so long, right? You can only have this demon moving from person to person for so long before it gets too repetitive. So I felt like an hour and 23 minutes is probably about as far as you could get with this before it starts to feel like that, where you're just kind of like, come on, just catch the demon and get it, or lose, or whatever's going to happen. So that worked for me. Sometimes that's how it is. Sometimes the constraints on the film tend to, with the direct-to-video ones in particular. But I mean, you could say that about anything. A lot of people weren't big fans of The Irishman at 3.5 hours. Like maybe, if he was told he couldn't get it in and he had to do it for less, maybe it's if it's slimmed down or something, it works better. I feel like that's what happened here.
Yeah, no. Well, and I mean, I hate to compare this to other films, but what's really wild is since the Expendables came out in 2010, Dolph's output has been insane. I mean, he has been doing as many as 3 films a year. I mean, I don't think he's been at the rate as Steven Seagal. I mean, you know what I mean? But he has just been working constantly. And let's be honest, a lot of these films are not that great. Some of them are kind of a chore to get through, and I think he knows that as well. But I would easily, out of all the films that he's done, I would easily put at the top of that pile of all those films. It is, like I said, it's fun. The character that he plays, I mean, just he's this backwoods supernatural hunter, if you will, who's vaping, quite a bit.
Right.
I love one of his first scenes in the film. I want to say it's his 3rd or 4th scene, but where he's meeting up with Christina Kleb's character, who's the sheriff of the town, and he's just sitting there eating ribs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The other cool thing about this film, if they wanted, because I guess the returns on the film were actually pretty good, because both Dolph and Mike Mendez were, again, they were hitting the marketing and doing some various podcast interviews and things like that. I think if they wanted, they could make a sequel to this where the character of Jebediah is hunting a new supernatural being or supernatural monster, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think that would be really big, because I think Dolph, it was such a fun character that he's playing. I think I agree with you that some of the newer ones have been a bit of a slog, and I think part of the thing is that his roles in some of those newer ones are not the role. He's sort of taking a supporting role, which one he did right after this one, Altitude. I actually liked it because I felt like his character was really cool, and I got a sense that yes, he wanted a smaller role, but it felt like he was almost sort of opening the door for Denise Richards to be the hero in that film, and he is just sort of chewing scenery as the pilot in it. So sometimes I don't mind it if there's not a lot of Dolph, but then the movie has to really make it work if there's not a lot of Dolph. I think that's the problem, is that it's easy to just lean on having Dolph in a scene and let him do his thing and make it interesting. If you're not going to have a lot of Dolph in the movie, you really have to do something like that, like with Denise Richards or whatever. I think Acceleration was another one recently that I did like what they were doing there with Natalie Byrne. I don't think they did it quite as well as Altitude, but I think if Dolph is doing that kind of thing where maybe he's trying to usher somebody in to have a starring career as well, I'm with that. But yeah, I agree with you. I think one thing that made Don't Kill It so good was that it had a lot of Dolph in it, and his character was a lot of fun to watch. And so if they made another one of these, I think it would be a huge hit for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could see him taking on I don't know, man. I mean, the character of Jebediah, I mean, I think they established already that he, tracks down supernatural oddities, if you will. I mean, so they could have had him taking on a Sasquatch or, whatever it may be. Obviously, they're going to have to work with the parameters and the confines of whatever the budget and the shooting time is going to allow. Sadly, I haven't heard if they're going to be doing anything like that. I don't think they are, but it's, I mean, and I think what's funny is I think with Dolph, kind of like with Stallone, in the 80s and the 90s, I think a lot of these guys, yeah, they're attracted to a character, but they also look at a film and say, okay, not only is this a cool character, but is this a character that could potentially kickstart a franchise? Because let's face it, nowadays in Hollywood, even in the direct to video stuff, it's franchises. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
what that's what's going to sustain a career. Kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. I think that's why you see so many actors nowadays go into TV, because that's work that is prolonged and is going to be longer than 18 days or 20 days, whatever the shooting is. And so, yeah, I'd like to think that Dolph saw this and he thought that not only is it a cool character, but is this a character that I would enjoy playing again for a sequel if the opportunity arose? Most definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Dolph with franchises because I was recently on a different podcast where I was talking about my top 10 DTV stars, and of course Dolph was number one. But what was interesting is he was number one without really having any kind of DTV franchise. He doesn't, you've got Don the Dragon with the Blood Sports, or Cynthia Rothrock with China O'Brien, or Rage of Honor, Tiger Claws, those ones. And a lot of them have franchises. They've got multiple movies that they did, whereas Dolph never really did. Like his movies, I mean, yes, he did the Kindergarten Cop sequel where it was doing one of those direct-to-video sequels of a theatrical film, but none of his movies, other than like I guess the Universal Soldier character that he did a couple times, but really his movies are just one and done. He doesn't generally do sequels.
Well, it's funny because he a lot of the projects I think were intended that way. I mean, there was obviously Blackjack, which was intended to be a television series, but then that one didn't latch and didn't get past the pilot episode. He did the film Diamond Dogs, where he played kind of this brawler Indiana Jones type figure. That one was not a success, and so unfortunately, that one didn't get another film. I actually kind of dig Diamond Dogs. I think that's a fun one. The one that I just reviewed recently that we talked about was Missionary Man. Missionary Man, if you watch it, that's another one of the ones that he wrote and directed and everything. That one, I totally tell. I mean, that's his version of Eastwood's Man with No Name. You know what I mean? I honestly think if that was a success, we would have gotten another adventure of the character of Ryder. That's his character's name in that one, coming to another town to save the town, kicking ass, reading the Bible, sipping his tequila, and then he moves on, goes to another town. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a testament to his success that he hasn't had any of those franchises, and he's still so big. But it would be interesting if this is the one. Don't Kill It is the one, or if he circles back with Missionary Man or one of those other ones and redoes that. I mean, I almost feel like now he's at a stage where, I mean, maybe part of it is the shooting schedule, or maybe he's at a point where he doesn't want to do a big leading role and shoot so many scenes a day where. But he has. I think right now he has the stature where people making the movie, they want to put him on the cover, especially the direct-to-video movie. They want to put him on the cover and know that it's going to sell. And I mean, I think, for example, Creed 2. I mean, that was almost like what Stallone had to do to make Creed 2 was to get Dolph on and make it that sort of like Drago Creed rematch or something like that. And so Dolph made. I mean, I feel like Dolph made that movie what it was. I feel like if he could pick a lot of projects now. I mean, I don't know how it works specifically. If people are coming to him with a lot of things, but I almost feel like if he wanted to do something like that, I think it's more up to him. But I think he could do something like that.
No, I think there is a character out there waiting to be played by him that I think would easily sustain a franchise if they want to go forward with it. But I mean, the one thing that we haven't really talked about that's really unfortunate with the direct-to-video market these days is, I mean, if you look at the market back in the early 2000s compared to now, I mean, these things nowadays are shot on a fraction of the budget that these films got. Back in the early 2000s. Back in the early 2000s, I mean, a direct-to-video film, regardless if it was Dolph Van Damme, whoever, these films would get anywhere from 10 to 15 million. Nowadays, I mean, it's really hard to believe, but nowadays they're made for less than 4 million. I mean, you know what I mean? And you got to think like a lot of the star's salary is going into that as well. So that's why you don't see them in the movie a heck of a lot, because they're trying to pad their trying to make the most of what they could get that actor for on set. I mean, it's really bizarre. So as much as I personally would love to see that happen, who knows if we will? I mean, because I mean, we haven't really talked about it, but I mean, if you look at Jean-Claude Van Damme for that matter, um, I think Van Damme is pretty much retired. I don't think we're going to be seeing a heck of a lot from him anymore. I think he's at a place where he's comfortable, and I don't think he needs to really keep working.
Yeah, I mean, I almost think those Kickboxer, call them what you want, sequels, reboots, whatever they were, those were almost like his wrapping up kind of thing, where he's feeling like, I'm the older sensei character, and that's really where I'm at right now. That I'm this is the last thing I'm giving people or something like that. I agree with you there. I mean, you never know. Of course, things happen and projects come around and people can make money, but the one I'll always remember is in JCVD when he did that movie. He was doing this big long take, and he says to the director who's making him do this long take, "Hey man, I'm 50 years old. I can't do these kinds of things anymore." Well, now he's almost 60 at this point, I think, or maybe he's even turning 60 this year. So yeah, with these guys getting up there in age as well, to have to do a lot of, especially a lot of action in a movie. I mean, and I think for someone like Dolph, I could say, listen, you've done your work. You've given me so many great action scenes that I don't need you to go into a movie and do a scene every 15 minutes. And so, that's probably part of it too.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that actually, because a buddy of mine, he said it perfectly. So I'll give a shout out to my buddy Brenton actually, but he said it to where if you think about it, guys like Dolph and Van Damme and even Sly and Arnold and everything, they are they're playing it right nowadays, because nowadays in the films they're doing, they're kind of taking on these mentor roles, if you will,
Yeah.
or these wise sage roles, if you will, and kind of ushering in, the new guys, whoever it may be, or the new women, whatever. But then if you and then if you look at Steven Seagal, though, nope, he's still playing the same badass, which is hilarious because he's like in his mid 60s or whatever, and he's still playing the same type of roles that he did, back in the early 90s. I mean, if anything, he should be the same thing, doing kind of the mentor type thing. But nope, he's still the badass, but he's gonna be sitting for most of the entire production. And anytime there's an action sequence, well, they're gonna bring in a stunt double and film him from the back. So.
Yeah, I mean, one that I think of that I saw with him recently was Absolution. That was, it was a Keone Waxman directed film, but it had Byron Mann in it. So it was like all of like the real heavy duty, the heavy lifting action scenes. Those were Byron Mann doing those, and then Seagal would come in and do kind of a slap chop thing here and there, and then they would just go back and do more Byron Mann. But Byron Mann still had to get captured. It still had to be Seagal that had to save Byron Mann or get him out of the bad situation he was in. So it was still made sure that Seagal was the main hero, right? Even though Byron Mann was doing all the heavy lifting for him.
But see, that's the going back to Don't Kill It. That's the great thing about Dolph, is for this small film that was shot in just a couple weeks, on a small budget or whatever. Well, you know what? Dolph is going to he's going to deliver a good performance in a fun movie. You know what I mean? And the thing about it too is, I mean, this film. I mean, I don't know if you picked up on this or not, but in a lot of ways, it it feels like a sci-fi original movie. You know what I
Right.
mean? I mean, so, but I would say it's certainly much more fun, and I would enjoy revisiting it much more than anything else they've done, whether it's Sharknado or Alligator versus Octopus, or any of the garbage that you see coming out of that studio.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. I mean, it had the feel of a sci-fi original, and there were some scenes, where the dialogue went on maybe a little bit too long, or you kind of wanted them to get to the point about something, and that kind of thing happens sometimes with movies like this. So even with an hour and 23-minute runtime, you could tell that, like you said, that there were some constraints of the budget. And I think with those sci-fi films, that's kind of the idea too, right? Those sci-fi pictures ones where it's like, especially if it's The Asylum or something like that, it's like, let's bang it out quickly. But there is something I think about having someone like Dolph as pinning down a lot of the scenes. When he's the anchor, you can really get away with a lot, or you can cover up some of the things that maybe aren't as good, and then he makes the rest of it compelling. And I think, again, like you were talking about, somebody giving him a character like this that he can really run with. I mean, it just, the moment he steps on the screen, like he's in that bar scene, and there's that guy that's harassing the woman that we find out, of course, that she's a lady of the night, and she's not just hooking up with Dolph because she wants to. She's wants to get paid for it. But when he's beating up that guy in the bar that's giving her a hard time, it's just pure great. Like he's loving it. Like he's just eating up that character. And it just makes it so much better for us to watch it. Because, I mean, how many times do we see movies where it's like, Seagal or whoever's just beating up some guy that's giving a woman a hard time? It always happens, right? It's just part of those movies. But when Dolph does it, especially when he's really into the character, it adds an extra element to it, which I think makes it more fun.
Oh, the guy has a presence on screen, and I think he knows it as well. When he comes in, I mean, he's like 6'5", whatever, and he has that chiseled chin and everything like that. So when he's on screen, I think he knows that he can command a room and he can command a set, and it's great to see. The scene that I'm surprised you haven't mentioned or we haven't talked about is just the scene in the town hall where I mean. It's such a great scene. It is so much fun. I feel like that scene alone makes the film worth it. I was talking about this actually when we were discussing the Minion, when I had my Minion episode, and we are discussing. I look at the Minion and Don't Kill It as just basically being more fun versions of Denzel Washington's Fallen. I don't know if do you remember the film Fallen? Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
So pretty much kind of the prestigious art house version of this film here, where pretty much a demon, it moves from the body of someone else or whatever. And Fallen is okay, but I feel like this one's kind of the more trashy, fun, tongue-in-cheek version of that.
Yeah. No, for anybody who hasn't seen Don't Kill It yet, if you want, we talk about this scene in the town hall. You can just kind of mute and come back like in a minute or so. And because I do think it's worth talking about, because I think it really it is like that. When you think of like the old sort of golden age of Hollywood comedies, like the Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy or something like that, when they would do Three Stooges, when they would do those kind of like who has the bag kind of things, where it's like this mysterious bag or something is moving from person to person and nobody knows how to get it or get a hold of it or something. They do that with the demon, where it's just like Dolph is ready to go, and then somebody else kills the person, and the demon goes to somebody else, and it's just like every time he thinks he's got a line on it, somebody else gets killed, and it keeps moving. I just thought that was a real genius way to handle that, because again, like you said, this is something that has been done before. This is territory that's been covered, and to do something new with it, I thought that town hall scene was really where they do the most new with it. Where I just absolutely love that scene.
Oh, I agree. It's totally fun, and Dolph is playing it well, where he's like, stop killing it. I mean, it's hilarious. I mean, it even inhabits the body of the old lady. I mean, it's a ton of fun, and I mean, I think at that point, I mean, this is a film that is not taking itself too seriously, and I think everybody on set and in the production clearly knew that, and I feel like when I feel like there's a couple ways you can play that. I mean, obviously, Mike Mendez and everybody on this, they knew it was a silly thing, but they were still trying to make it the best they possibly could. Now, on the other hand, if you look at a film that Dolph did back in 2000 called Agent Red, and I hate bringing up Agent Red because it is, I feel like, the lowest of the low, but there is a film that obviously when they were making it, they knew that it was junk, that it was just not good, but in the end, I mean, they're even writing lines of dialogue in the film like, "Oh, what's that? It sounds like a bad action movie," and you almost anticipate them look at the camera and wink. You know what I mean? You the viewer for suffering through it. So I feel like there's a balance to play. But if you can have fun with it, but still try and make it look good, and if everyone's given their all, then and no one's sleepwalking through it like so many of these films in the direct-to-video market do, then you're going to have some good results.
Yeah, and I think one thing you mentioned with Agent Red. I mean, some of the things with Agent Red that made that one such an interesting flick was that one. I mean, it was borrowing footage from other movies. I mean, it was like taking scenes from Stormcatcher, and of course, like I think Jim Wynorski was brought in to save the picture, right? Like I think another director was there, so it was like all these things were cobbled together. And you were talking about how Don't Kill It had ran into some issues with the production, and I think depending on what the fixes are to fix the movie, I think that can also be whereas Don't Kill It wasn't just like cobbling things together from other sci-fi pictures and just throwing them in the movie. They were just kind of taking what they had and making the best with it. I think sometimes things like that can help too, where it's like they're making decisions because they want to make it a complete movie or something like that.
Well, exactly, and I mean, with Don't Kill It, them changing the shooting location to Alabama, I think added some texture and some details to the characters uh, as well. I mean, Jebediah has that Southern accent that he's
Right.
that he's using. I mean, so that worked for it, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like you said, it was like a you know a sci-fi pictures original, but something better than what you expect from that. And I think you're right about the characters being, the actors being invested. I think like you talked about with James Chalk, he really was all in with that character. I think again, Dolph really enjoyed it, and Christina Klebb, I think, was another person who. I think this is slightly before she did like Hellboy, which ended up just being ended up being a flop. That the 2019 Hellboy didn't go anywhere, but I think she was kind of looking for parts like this where she could be the lead as opposed to just the Halloween or whatever, where you just kind of throw her in there for a bit and whatever happens. And I think she also felt like she really had something to prove being one of the lead characters, and I think that always helps too when you've got you've got actors and talent in the movie that feel like they've got something to lose. They want to make a good showing because they feel like it's important for their career.
Christina Klebe in the film I think she did a wonderful job in the film. I mean, and what I really loved about it is she was practically Dolph's equal in a lot of
Right.
ways, and not only in terms of her in terms of her character and her strength and her intelligence, but what I really loved about it is, I mean, you've seen it as well, man. With when it comes to these direct-to-video films, what's wild about it is they hire the action star who is, let's face it, getting older, but then the love interest they hire keeps getting younger. I mean, and
Yes.
it's almost kind of gross, and it almost comes off creepy. I mean, if you look at Blackwater, the love interest that they
Right.
gave Van Damme is
Yes.
is just, I mean, what's the age difference there? You know what I mean? I mean, and the other one that comes to mind that just really made me just, I did not care for it at all, was Kindergarten Cop 2. I mean,
Right.
in
Yes.
Kindergarten
Yeah.
Cop 2, they teamed Dolph up with this gal who, I mean, is just, I mean, not only is she old enough to be his daughter, but I mean, they make no reference of that. I mean, it just feels kind of icky. And what I loved about this one is the fact that they hired Christina Klebe. I don't know what her exact age is. I mean, but she's clearly not some 20-something-year-old gal. You know what I mean? I mean, she has some age on her, but I mean, she looks great. She does a wonderful job, and that's the other thing too. I feel like with these films, I feel like the producers, they need to realize who their market is, and I get that. I get that they're marketing to a certain demographic, if you will, but they also have to realize, look, the people who are going to be watching these films, Seagal, Van Damme, whatever, are the ones who grew up with these guys. Okay. So obviously, you and I, we grew up with these guys in the 90s. We are
Right.
considerably older nowadays. So we are really not into seeing a 60-year-old make out with a 20-year-old. You know what I mean? Like, that's just, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I think they need to give us a little bit more credit, because I think audiences, the demographic who are going to be renting these films and purchasing them, I think we're going to be okay. Obviously, we are fine with our hero being partnered up with a gal who is his age. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Christina Klebe. One thing that's interesting if you go to her IMDb page is that her birthday is listed. She's listed as being born the same year as me, 79. But then in her bio, she says she's born in 85, which it shows you how Hollywood is. Which it shows me how old I am. That I'm definitely that women that were born my age in Hollywood can't say that they were born my age anymore, or that they want to get parts. But you make a great point that for us as mature moviegoers, we don't need that. We would prefer actresses like Denise Richards is playing a mature character in her film as an FBI agent, and we don't need her to be whatever she was in Wild Things or anything like that anymore. We're looking for, like you said, we're looking for actresses that can be an equal to these characters who are these actors that are older now, and I guess maybe it is that they just don't trust us. They don't think enough of us will view it that way. But I am in complete agreement with you.
Yeah, no. So anyway, but in the end, I mean, look, don't kill it. I mean, Dolph has done a ton of films. He's done his filmography is extensive. I mean, the guy is a working actor. I mean, and there's the good, there's the bad, there's the ugly. As far as the ugly goes, unfortunately, a lot of it kind of permeates the mid to later 2000s era, if you will. But I would say Don't Kill It is easily one of his most fun. Not saying it's one of his best, but I would say it's one of his most fun.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Well, maybe that's a good place to leave it at, because we're closing in on the hour mark. But before we do wrap up, Sean, can you tell people where they can find you both on social media and the podcast?
Yeah, well, I mean, the podcast, we are on iTunes, Stitcher, all those podcasting apps. There is also a Facebook page, so please check out the Facebook page and please like it, share it, and all that good stuff. It's I Must Break This Podcast. We are there. And then you can also check out the official webpage for the show, where you can get in contact with me and just kind of take a look at the running list of episodes, which is imustbreakthispodcast.wordpress.com.
Excellent. Yeah, and by all means, I think people should definitely check it out. I've listened to it. I really enjoyed it. I think, Dolph Lundgren is probably, when we do a Dolph-centered podcast here on the show, they seem to be the most popular. So there are a lot of Dolph fans that are listening to this. And yeah, if you haven't checked out I Must Break This Podcast, you need to get more Dolph fix. That's the place to go for sure, because I think it's really great content there.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that it is the only Dolph Lundgren fan podcast that is out there. So
yeah, it's definitely worth listening to. But I think it's for the kind of movies that you're, direct-to-video kind of things that I think they're the kind of movies people like to hear about. But also, it is really great that you get those interviews in there, because it is cool to hear the behind the scenes on some of this stuff. And so I think people should definitely go check that out for that too, because I think for a lot of us, we speculate on what happened with these movies, but to actually hear it from the people involved, it's always really cool to hear.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for coming on, Sean. It was a really great time, and thank you everybody for listening. Until next time, that was the Direct to Video Connoisseur podcast. Bye, everyone.
Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.